Well, good day, viewers. Look what's back. December the 20th, I worked on this thing for a misfire and poor heat out of the heater. Cooling system was low. Customer reports that check engine light has come back on, although it hasn't been running all that bad, but they noticed the temperature cycling. They've added coolant to it at least once. Let's see what lights we have on here. Check engine light, VSC light, four-wheel drive light. So let's scan it and see what kind of codes it has to offer. Okay, let's do a network code scan. Before it had misfires on cylinder 2 and 4, and I couldn't find anything wrong. The misfires went away. Coolant temperature circuit low input. Now, they did note that the temperature had been cycling dramatically from hot to cold. I got a funny feeling this thing has a combustion leak into the cooling system, because the coolant is going down and yet there's no evidence of an external leak that I could see. I'm going to check again today. We'll check the freeze frame data and see what the temperature was when that code set. The ABS is not liking the data from the end control module. Neither is the four-wheel drive, so those are related. Open and pressure sensor circuit, abnormal refrigerant pressure. Well, that's minor. We're just about done. 13 controllers. And it saved the data report. Let's see what the freeze frame data has to say about the coolant temperature when this codes only. No, I went too far. I went freeze frame. Yes, let's have a look at this. What was the temperature when the code set? Now this records 5 frames, 3 before and 2 after, I believe. Hopefully we have a data list, which should include the temperature. Intake air temperature minus 14. No misfires. Transmission fluid is at 37. I must have missed the temperature. Well, I'll answer the phone. So here's the coolant temperature. 51, 51, 16, 16, 35. That's pretty wild fluctuation considering these frames take about half a second to update. The intake air temperature was minus 14. I wonder if there's runtime in here. Runtime, there it is. 14, 18, 14, 19, 14, 19, 14, 19, 14, 20. So it's 5 frames of data is a total of 2 seconds. And it's jumped from 51 to 16 degrees and back up to 35 in 2 seconds. Well, I think we're going to see if we got any combustion gases in the coolant reservoir. So I got the combustion leak tester set up. I'm going to start it up. blocked off the vent. The recovery bottle is about half full. Now we're going to let it run for a while. Yeah, I'm going to let it run for a while. Well, I'm not really picking up anything on this fluid. Mind you, my fluid might be a little contaminated because it's old. Now, temperature on the scan tool says it's 95 Celsius and the radiator cooling fan is running, but it's cold air coming out of it. So I wonder if the thermostat is sticking. Or either that or the cooling system, the rad is full or rad is low. There's no a pressurized reservoir. There's no way to check the actual rad, but the fans are running and the air coming off the rad is cold. Yet I'm not getting any kind of sign of it should turn yellow if there's a carbon dioxide in the overflow bottle. Yeah. I think it's starting to turn yellow. Definitely greener than it was. Got a yellowish tinge to it now. I wonder what the temperature is running at now. I'm going to check. According to the scan tool, it's 105 Celsius and there's cool air coming off this rad. So I think the system is low on coolant. Definitely yellower or more yellow than it was when I started. Well, I compared the fluid to the bottle of test fluid and it's pretty much the same color. It's not turning yellow. I'm not sure my fluid is good because it's pretty old, so I'm going to get some new stuff. But the other thing that bothers me now is it hit 114 Celsius. I got cold air out of the heater and cold air from the rad. So I think the thermostat might be sticking. So for what it's going to take, I'm going to put a thermostat in this thing and reevaluate it. So we're back working on this Toyota Rav. And here's what I think is going on. I think the thermostat is sticking, not opening properly, because when it was running yesterday, it was... the cooling fan was running. It was well over 195. It was like 205 Fahrenheit, and yet there was cold air coming off the rad, so like the coolant wasn't circulating. I did lift it up in the air and check for leaks. The only evidence of a leak was evidence of leak coming out of this vent, so I think it's overheating and blowing the coolant out towards the firewall because there was coolant down on the cross member and the lower control arm, yet no coolant around the water pump. So I'm going to put a thermostat in it. and hopefully we're going to run it, and I'm going to drive it to town tomorrow and see how it is. To do the thermostat, we got to take this overflow bottle out of the way. There's a bolt underneath here, so I'm going to take this front cover off. So the way to pull these pins out is to push the center down just slightly, and then these pull out of here. And that one's a new one I put in there. That's a new one I put in there. So I got to take out those ones after. So some of these have been changed up to a different style. So I'll have to get, these ones you have to pry the center out to pull the pins out. Well, I'll get some more tools out here. So you need to support the front of the engine with a jack stand and a block of wood, and remove the nut from underneath here from the bottom. It's a 14 mil headed nut, and then the 17 mil nuts from the top, and bolts, cap screws. Take the motor mount out, turn it clockwise, bring it out, and take the bracket out from underneath. Now I've got to take this bracket off, and I can see that there's a brace, yeah, because the thermostat is down here. So there are 6 bolts that hold this bracket on to the engine. Now I'm toying with the idea of removing the entire thermostat housing, because it's bolted to the water pump right here with these bolts, 1, 2, and I think there's 3. Otherwise I got to remove this bolt and one down inside here, which is very difficult to get to. We'll see. So you have to take some tension out of the serpentine belt, take the idler pulley off from underneath, because the thermostat housing hits the idler pulley. There's the idler pulley there. And you can get the nuts off with a ratcheting 10 mil socket or wrench, but it's much easier if the idler pulley is out of the way. And this belt tool is sitting up against this ear here. I'm going to put a tie wrap on it to hold it here, so I don't have to take the belt right off. Installing this thermostat, there's a little jiggle pin in here, and that's to let the air bubbles out of the system. Make sure it's installed up. Put some dielectric grease around the seal here. There's that jiggle pin I was talking about right there. Focus. Again, make sure that's installed up, and put some dielectric grease around the seal. So the thermostat's back in, motor mount's back in, bracket's back in, bolt from the bottom is in, brace on the intake manifold is in. This is the vent nipple here. If you loosen that while you're filling the cooling system and wait for it to start bubbling out of here, you'll have removed most of the airlock. So now I'm going to hook the scanner up to it. I'm going to start it, and I'm going to monitor coolant temperature while we watch to see when the thermostat opens. So the ambient temperature in the shop is 21, coolant temperature is 16 according to the temp sensor. So we're going to start it now and run it up to temperature. There's no runtime kit in this data list, so we'll take note of the time right now. It's 8:30 p.m. and we're going to let this run. We should see this climb to around, in Celsius, around 90, 95, and then it should drop back, indicating the thermostat open. It's been running about 8 minutes. It came up to 80, and now it's dropped down to 77. So it seems like the thermostat's opening, but there's still air in the system. We need to get it to stabilize and see what it stabilizes at. We've got heat out of the heater, and we've got heat from the rad now. But we've got to run it a little bit longer and see if it stabilizes. So after running for about 30 minutes, it seems to have stabilized around 85 degrees Celsius. It hit a max of 89 and dropped down to 85. We've got fantastic heat out of the heater. So I'm going to let it cool off tonight and drive it into town tomorrow. Take it on about a 35 kilometer run one way, so 70 kilometers total. And we'll see how the heater performs and how the temperature performs. I think my lock testing fluid was contaminated because it's old and it seems to have a shelf life once it's open. And I think that the results of testing for combustion gases in the cooling system are inconclusive. The fluid should be green and turn blue. Sorry, it's blue and turn green. My fluid has already turned green in the bottle, and that's because of it being old. So I hope like hell this doesn't have a combustion leak into the cooling system, and it was just overheating because of a sticking thermostat and blowing it out the overflow. We will see tomorrow. Well, that's not a good sign. I left the shop this morning from the heated shop. I got very poor heat out of the heater now as it's warmed up. Temperature is climbing. I can't see it digitally on the scan tool because my eyes are bad. But you can see its temperature gauge is climbing right into the danger zone, and no heat out of the heater. It's freezing in the car. And so I believe now that there is a combustion leak in the cooling system. It forms an airlock in the heater, and that's why we get no heat out of the heater. And it causes isolated hotspots. And in a few seconds, the temperature should take a dip, and hopefully we'll get some heat out of this heater because it's freezing in the car. Now the check engine lights come on. You see the temperature doing wild ass things, and it could be because the gauge is networked, so it's not really sure what the temperature is. I'm starting to feel some heat coming out of the heater. I turned the heater fan off because it was freezing in here. So I made it into town. The temperature gauge cycled multiple times, hot to cool, and it hit, according to the scan tool, 135 degrees Celsius at one point. It's now currently running at 125 or 123, which is way too hot. Got some heat out of the heater, although it's poor. And of course you can see the check engine light is on, and the VSC light, and the four-wheel drive light, and that's all because of the retrieved fault code. I'm sure it's got a code for coolant temperature, sensor implausibility or something. So based on that sequence of events, I'm going to condemn the fact that there's combustion gases leaking into the cooling system. It forms an airlock in the heater, and that causes no heat out of the heater, and localized hotspots, overheating. The cooling fan is running like full blast right now, trying to cool this thing off. And yeah, I might get some block testing fluid and try one more time. So I got another bottle of block testing fluid. You notice how blue it is? I hope it shows up blue in the camera. And this is what I have, and it's turned green. I know it used to be blue, but it has a green tinge to it. So I imagine, because this is probably about 3 years old since I bought this, even though it's in a semi-sealed container, once it's exposed to oxygen and carbon dioxide, it's going to begin to turn color. So we're going to repeat this cylinder head leakage test, combustion gas leakage test, again with some new block fluid, and see if that gives us different results. So we can see that the fluid in there is definitely blue, and I'm going to start it up and start drawing some fumes off of this thing. Turning green. Now I've got the vent capped on this side. But I think you can see that it's slowly turning from green to yellow. My understanding is that the chemical reacts with carbon dioxide from the combustion process. If somebody knows anything different than that, please correct me. Put it into perspective. You can see the color now compared to the original color. This is blue and this has turned greenish yellow. Now when I was driving it home this afternoon, it went right into the red, hit about 130 degrees Celsius a couple of times and then spiked back down. No heat out of the heater because the combustion gases form an air pocket in the heater, and then once it burps, once it purges that, then you get heat out of the heater and the temperature drops to normal again. Well, unfortunately, we've got to give this customer the bad news. I'm not sure if we'll be fixing this given the age of the vehicle and the mileage on it. It's got 255,000 kilometers on it. It's got a timing chain rattle when it starts, so it needs timing chains and guides and who knows what else inside the engine. So maybe a head gasket failure, maybe a cracked head. Changing the thermostat didn't help at all. Oh well. Proof positive. Head gasket problem.